the music for today's parade is Jim Roback and the Great Circus Parade Band.
That is the voice of Ernest Borgnine in a clown outfit, kicking off the brand new Milwaukee PBS documentary called Remembering the Great Circus Parade, which was a huge tradition in summertime here in Milwaukee. And to share the behind the scenes and lots of history about this spectacle is Joe Sankey from Milwaukee PBS, a co-producer of this fine documentary and also a longtime set designer. Artist yourself, I would say.
Well, I would certainly hope so. They've kept me around for long enough. And it's great to be here. Thank you so much for inviting me.
My pleasure. After hearing that Ernest Borgnine introduction, tell me why you wanted to make a documentary about the Great Circus Parade, because it hasn't happened since 2009.
Well, it was uniquely Milwaukee, with the exception of a couple years when it was in Baraboo and in Chicago. And at its height, it was the third largest parade in America, following Macy's Thanksgiving Day Parade and the Tournament of Roses Parade in California, just in terms of its size, the number of units in it, and how many people came to watch it. Over 800,000 people would line the streets of Milwaukee. It was shown to over 800,000 people. And it was shown on PBS nationally. It went over the air to over 80 countries, and it was also shown on the Armed Services radio and television network so that our men and women overseas who might have been feeling a little bit homesick can watch a piece of Americana go by.
Was the Great Circus Parade always on July 4th?
No.
So it's interesting
It would change, but it was always around like the second Sunday in July. To my mind, it always seemed to coincide with Bastille Days. Watch the parade, go have baguettes.
Well, Joe, I was able to watch a preview screening last night in my home, and it is a jam-packed hour of incredible archive footage. You see the change in the city's skyline over the years since the 60s. And you're right, you see all these people together, but what a mass spectacle of all these creative wagons. Every single one is different. The people involved, all dressed to the nines in costumes and music. It really was a spectacle.
It was. And the thing that I noticed, because in preparing for this show, I watched 16 different parades over the years, and watching them in detail.
That's a lot of preparation.
Yeah, watching them in detail, taking multitude notes. What wagon is this? What conversation are we having? Do we have an interesting story here? And the parade was never the same from one year to the next. They managed to always keep it fresh. There would be new wagons added, or a band that we hadn't seen before, or new costumes. It was never the same old, same old. The folks at Circus World Museum knew that they had Wisconsin's national treasure, or as Tova Borgnine once said, America's national treasure. And they were determined to keep it at the top of its game.
And the circus, the entertainment business of the circus, has meant a lot to the state of Wisconsin. The Ringling Brothers actually...
There were more than just the Ringling Brothers. The Ringling Brothers were the biggest ones who had their winter quarters here up until around the period of World War I, when they, like a lot of other people in the frozen north, decided, hey, Florida's a lot warmer. We can move down there. And the Ringling Brothers, there was all these circus families knew each other. And they were all intermarried, and they were friends and things like that. So yes, they were competition, but they were all kind of like family. And a great majority of them were in Baraboo. And that's how the Circus World Museum is there. It's the old winter quarters, the surviving buildings, which have now been, multiplied and turned into a real showplace.
Well, and Milwaukee PBS has really been a treasure trove, an archive of footage because Milwaukee PBS just celebrated their 65th anniversary last year. So what discoveries did you make in the vaults?
About the circus parade?
Yeah.
I only did in my career probably 6, 7 parades. I wasn't here. I'm not a native Milwaukeean. I wasn't here to watch the parades in the 70s and the 80s.
That's okay. 800,000 people were. So.
Yes. But what I just noticed were the stories. The stories of the people who were in the parade. We meet a costume designer who earlier in her life, she was a circus aerialist, Mamie Ward. She was a trapeze artist. And she became a costume designer because she understood the needs of the performers.
Yeah, you have to have a great fitting garment.
Yes, you do.
To be an active performer in the circus. There aren't many people who sit around at the circus.
And there were stories about that, and the stories, and what I call my people, the craftsmen, who restored the wagons, the wood carvers, the painters, the people who would get these, they were decrepit wrecks. And many times they had been used as chicken coops. They had been rotting out in fields for years. But Chappie Fox, had this kind of like network that he would find these things and bring them to Baraboo.
And that's one of the old Milwaukee PBS shows was called I Remember that Jim Peck used to host. And Jim Peck used to also be one of the parade announcers. And this is a moment of Ben Barkin chatting with Jim Peck about creating and reviving the Great Circus Parade.
Well, this character, Chappie Fox, who's truly my inspiration, he came to me in 1962. He was the director of the museum in Baraboo because the 5 Ringling Brothers were raised there. And he said, Ben, if we do a parade the way they did it at the turn of the century all the way through 1930, he said, we draw thousands and thousands of people to Baraboo. And I was intrigued. He showed me some pictures of 1905, 1910, and it really looked good to me. And I said, Chappie, I like the idea. But if it's true that you'll draw thousands and thousands of people at Baraboo, you won't have enough restrooms to accommodate the crowd.
Ever the pragmatist.
But I said, I like the idea, and let's go over and see Bob Eline. Bob Eline was chairman of Schlitz, and he loved animals, and he was a polo player, loved horses. And in 20 minutes, when Chappie presented that to him, Bob turned to me and said, Ben, how do you feel? I said, as long as we do it in Milwaukee, it'll be terrific. And Bob said to me, Ben, let's go for it.
So what did you feel when you found that nugget of footage?
This is stuff that is like finding gold nuggets, literally. You watch hours and hours and hours, and sometimes stuff like that just falls into your lap. And I'll admit, there were times when Dale Palachuk and I, who is the other producer in the program, there was stuff that we had to let it go on the cutting room floor, so to speak, because we were looking for the best of the best. And I would watch these parades, and then I would come with lists of stuff, and then Dale and I would watch the stuff, and we'd whittle it down, and we'd whittle it down, and we'd whittle it down and more. And then Dale would take the piece and edit it. And if he could find any way to edit out extraneous seconds of a tape, we knew we could save enough time that we could get something else in. That was trying to get the best, the very best, and the stuff like Ben Barkin talking about, you don't have enough bathrooms in Baraboo. I mean, that's just such a great, realistic line.
I was saying those are the
he
logistics.
has this great plan, but he's like, yeah, you got a few things you got to take care of.
Well, that's aiming high if they really expected 1 million people. But but I'm telling you, I watched it last night, and for an hour, it is just packed with wonderful, emotional footage. Some of it really touched me. This really is a time capsule of the 20th century and entertainment that ranged from 1903 all the way to 2009. So trains, wagons, clowns, horses, music. We're going to talk about all of that and more. Stay with us. Milwaukee PBS's Joe Sankey shares more behind the scenes of Remembering the Great Circus Parade, brand new documentary next on What's on Tap.
We're going to meet the man who has made all of this possible. I'd introduce to you Mr. Ben Barkin, who has worked very hard today, worked very hard for many months, worked very hard for many years to bring this wonderful circus parade through the streets of Milwaukee. Ben, congratulations. You're a wonderful man.
Do I have to tell you what a joy it is to just see hundreds of thousands of people enjoying themselves? You know, Ernie Borgnine really described it when he said this parade is just miles of smiles. And it's such a joy. It's not only the parade, but we have the train going from Baraboo to Madison to Janesville, then to the suburbs of Chicago, and then all the way back into Wisconsin. And to see thousands and thousands of people at the crossroads and the highways with American flags and cheering and whistling and with signs would say welcome. All I can tell you is it's a unique bit of Americana and something which gives me such added joy.
This is What's on Tap, and we are taking you behind the scenes of the brand new Milwaukee PBS documentary called Remembering the Great Circus Parade. It is a 1-hour special chock full of fantastic moments like that one. The voices you heard were Captain Kangaroo Bob Keeshan, who was a regular host of the Great Circus Parade in the 80s.
In the 80s, he did it for several years. He was a marvelous host. He loved circuses. He could go unscripted for minutes and just talk about circuses and talk about what circuses used to mean to the people of this country before radio, before television, before Hollywood, where children who may have never seen a tiger or an elephant or a giraffe except in a picture book were suddenly sitting on the sidewalk and there it was passing right in front of them. Even if your parents couldn't afford to take you to the circus, you had that free spectacle of the parade, which sadly, before this was revived in 1963, the last parade that toured an American city was in 1939.
Wow, that's quite a span there. And then the other voice that you heard with Bob Keeshan was Ben Barkin, one of two people who revived the Great Circus Parade. And this is what Remembering the Great Circus Parade documentary goes in depth.
Ben was just this dynamo
and to hear him
enthusiasm. He loved this like it was his child. And he would just sit and watch this thing, and you could see the glow on his face. And and really for people like Chappie Fox and the Sparrow family with the 40-horse hitch and stuff. I mean, these people put heart and soul into it, and they really loved it. They just did.
And you could hear it in Ben Barkin's voice to hear him in the previous clip that we played from I Remember, where he was talking about, hey, this is how we kind of got it all going. So then to hear him on site with Bob Keeshan talking about this is the culmination of this vision that they had and bringing people together and recreating painstakingly restoring everything from the wagons to the costumes and to the performers, and 800,000 people watching. There are thousands of people participating.
Oh yeah, I mean, in the early days, the numbers of horses and the numbers of participants, might have been 200 horses and a few hundred people. By the time we were into the 80s and 90s, it was like over 1,500, close to 2,000 people in the parade or on down at the circus grounds, several hundred horses of all sizes, ranging from the magnificent Clydesdales down to these cute as a button little miniature horses about the size of German shepherds, ponies, camels, elephants. I mean, we had Noah's Ark. There was Noah's Ark out marching down the streets of Milwaukee. And even I used to love the footage that we had of the kids just agape and staring at this stuff.
Good, clean fun. The Old National Bank talk and text line is open for you, 855-616-1620. We're getting some wonderful memories to share and more behind the scenes from the trains to the wagons to the clowns, to the calliopes. I learned how to say it correctly. It's not calliope.
No, it's a calliope.
More to learn from remembering the Great Circus Parade.
Chappie had visions that very few people I've ever had the pleasure of knowing could put together and then get other people eventually to come along and help him achieve his goal. And he spotted and knew where a lot of these former circus wagons were, which were rotting and decaying in different parts of the world. And he set out to find people to help him rebuild them once he got them located, and all he needed then was money to get it going.
He did a tremendous amount of research and moved out across the country trying to find out, really across the world in a sense, interconnecting with circus fans of America, asking if they knew of the whereabouts of wagons that he might go and photograph and include in his book. And through that research, and he kept copious notes, his files are just enormous over the years. When it came time when the real nut got cutting, which was in 1960, he knew where these were, in good or bad shape, most of them in pretty bad shape.
One of the big undertakings of the Circus World Museum has been wagon restoration. Those units who have had movie careers were in excellent shape. But then there are others that were in deplorable condition. Sometimes, Bob, the staff is able to find good blueprints and working plans to help them out, but for others, all that exists is an old picture.
Those are just some of the voices from the new hour-long documentary on Milwaukee PBS called Remembering the Great Circus Parade. And in the WTMJ studio with me is co-producer and set designer at Milwaukee PBS, Joe Sankey. So as a set designer, Joe, what is hearing about the level of restoration and craftsmanship on those wagons? What does that mean to you?
These are my people. The carpenters, the carvers, the painters who talk about just how you take something which might arrive in pieces and you're putting it together. Sometimes you would have to redo an entire carving, sometimes just a section. What kind of paint do you choose when you're looking at an old black and white photograph and it's like, how do you figure out what the colors are? Or one year they took one of the wagons that for years, all the carvings, they had painted it with gold metallic paint. Like, go to the hardware store, buy gold metallic paint.
Sure.
And for that particular year, they redid all the carvings in 24-karat gold leaf. And it was a beautiful sunny day for the parade that year. And this thing just gleamed. I mean, it was like the work of angels just sparkling in the sunlight. And we're kind of jaded today because we have a lot of things available us to use. And I think back in the late 19th century or the 20th century, people who didn't have access to mass entertainment to just see this stuff rolling by the streets of their town, it must have been magic. It must have been like, they were under a mystic spell or something.
Oh, that's the parade itself. And I'm going to tell you, Joe, that another part of the documentary that just grabbed me was the trains.
Oh, yeah.
Just watching the steam engine chug, 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 and the sounds that go with that, and watching all the people, kids and adults, lining up on train platforms to wave and see. It's one thing to have the parade down Wisconsin Avenue and all the different wagons, but this is its own parade on the railroad tracks.
Right, because this is how the circus traveled. I mean, starting in the last quarter of the 19th century, when our nation was slowly being knit together by those double rails of steel, this is the way the circus, as opposed to having to go through muddy roads and things, just loaded all on a train. And then the train is its own advertisement as it goes across the country. And they used the trains for decades. Finally, in 1956, the last circuses by train stopped, and then it became more of just going back to trucks and gasoline engines and things like that. But the circuses also didn't tour the way they used to. Now they would go to the major cities, and it really, they weren't hitting as much as they used to. And Americans were a little bit jaded with the circus. We had Hollywood, we had television, we had radio. And so the whole idea of the magic of the circus really kind of got tarnished a little. And so it was gone just long enough so that when we brought it back, and Ben Barkin and Chappie Fox brought it back in 1963, and then we started really televising it in 64, people remembered what they had missed. and older people got misty-eyed, remembering when they were kids, and a whole new generation and a generation following just became entranced with the circus parade again, because it was nothing that you were going to see on television if you could be there live watching it.
Sure, right there on the sidewalks. And the WTMJ Talk and Text line is always open, 855-616-1620, 608 texting in, Joe. The circus train would roll by my childhood home in Madison on its way from Baraboo to Milwaukee for the parade, the Calliope car, the lion cage car, the tiger's cage car, the passenger car with the performers sticking their heads out the window, smiling and waving. What a memory to have. That's Dan in Sebring, Florida. But it's just that text, he paints the picture. And then 262, I saw the very first Milwaukee Circus Parade back on July 4th, 1963, when it and the fireworks on July 3rd were sponsored by Schlitz Brewery. It was a new and exciting way to celebrate Independence Day as a youth. So I knew as soon as this documentary, Remembering the Great Circus Parade, came together, because I'm hosting it, and everybody that I told, I'm going to be the host, immediately you could see, I remember, and I remember this part. And so it's been fun. And I'm thrilled that I was part of the last 2009 parade. I was part of
You were a woman on the street?
Yes,
or
I was.
interviewer on the street?
Roving reporter for that live PBS national broadcast. And so to experience this spectacle and the sounds and the sights and truly the throngs of people, it really is special to us. And I want to go to the phone just for a moment, because I think we have someone on the phone. Mary Jane in Economowoc, were you part of the Great Circus Parade?
Actually, yes. I drove a team of 4 horses pulling one of the mirrored band wagons, and they called them band wagons because a band would be riding on the top and playing as it rode down the streets. What was fascinating, 2 things that I recall quickly, is that the only way you could get up on these wagons were by ladders. So if there was some kind of an emergency, you couldn't get down until someone brought you a ladder. I mean, you could have jumped, but it would have been harmful. The other part was that in driving my horses, I often will talk to them. I will give them sounds, step up, G and haw are right and left, whoa. The minute the band started to play, I couldn't hear a thing. I couldn't hear the steel hooves on the pavement. It was just like, oh my gosh, how am I going to do this? Well, the horses were very well trained, and they handled it beautifully. Yes.
You think
It
about
was such
all
a
of
wonderful
those.
experience.
Oh, Mary Jane, I'm so glad you were part of it. Thank you for sharing it. I hope you watch Milwaukee PBS. It debuts on Thursday.
We have it already planned to be taped. Yes, we want to be sure and have it for our kids. Thank you. Thank you tonight.
Thank you for
listening.
calling
Thanks for
in.
calling. We have more behind the scenes, a story that you won't see on the documentary from co-producer Joe Sankey. He knows a secret about Ernest Borgnine's clothes. That's next on WTMJ.
I was on Johnny Carson program one day, pushing one of my films, and he said, Ernie says, you seem to have done everything in show business. What's left? And I said, well, I had lots of things, he said, making conversation. Oh, yeah? Like what? Pinning me down. I said, well, I've never been a clown. Boy, he says, you're going to get letters. Sure enough, Ben Barkin, whom we'll see later, called me the next day, says, you want to be a clown, kid? We got the greatest circus parade in the world. Well, you'll see for yourselves. It is the greatest circus parade in the world.
That is the voice of Academy Award-winning actor Ernest Borgnine at the Great Circus Parade as part of the brand new Milwaukee PBS 1-hour documentary called Remembering the Great Circus Parade. And co-producer Joe Sankey is here. And you even know about Ernest Borgnine's costume, a fact that just couldn't fit into the documentary.
No, this is not something that will be seen in the show, but I'll tell you the story quickly. When Ernie decided he was going to be in the parade, he decided he needed a clown costume. So, as every good actor would, he went to a firm called Western Costume in Los Angeles that rents costumes to the film industry and television studios and things like that, things that might only be needed for one day or so on a short-term basis. And they found a costume that fit him, and eagle-eyed parade watchers will know that he wore the same costume every year. Now, Lovely Tova got a different costume made by the designers each year, but Ernie always had his clown costume. And years later, when Western costume was going out of business, they called him and they said, if you want your costume, you better come in right now and get it. And before we start selling off our stock. And they just gave it to him. They gave it to him no charge because of the fact that he was now known for wearing this costume, which they never got credit for. It was never in the credits. And he wore that costume up until his last appearance in the parade, when he no longer used to walk the 2.5 miles with his wife, because he's like, I'm 93. You can, I'll wear a golf cart.
He was in a golf cart that would look like a Mercedes, though.
Yes.
He was living large on that 2009 parade.
The golf cart was driven by the grandson of one of the people who founded Circus World Museum. And
I believe that'd be a great pride point to drive for. And I love that Ernest Borgnine was never the official Grand Marshal. He was the official Grand Clown.
Yes.
And I love in this documentary that you also learn that Bob Keeshan, Captain Kangaroo, is a member of the Clown Hall of Fame.
Clown Hall of Fame, exactly.
I thought I knew all there was to know about the beloved Bob Keeshan, but this really is a special documentary, and I watched it with my boyfriend, who is a lifelong Milwaukeean, and I can tell you he's a jaded media professional sometimes, and to watch it with him and hear him go, oh, wow, look, there's the arena in 1964, watching the parade there. And it's also, we can't get to every single part of this, but the 40-horse hitch and the community that it takes to train those horses, and that it was dentists and optometrists and veterinarians who all came together to the farm family.
It was a community project.
Yeah.
It was a community project with the Sparrow family to do that. I mean, this was not just them. This was like everybody that they knew had a job to do in preparing that.
And it's such a pride point for the people who participated, whether you were, we just heard from Mary Jane in Oconomowoc, whether you were a horse driver or whether you were performing in the parade as a clown or as any level of this, there's such a pride point of being part of the Great Circus Parade.
Yes, we would see the same clowns year after year who would show up, to walk the parade because they loved just shaking hands and hugging the kids and clowning around, excuse the pun. And that's how people were with the parade. And you could see the people were loving it. It's, this was pre-cell phone days. They weren't there sitting at their phones. They were just watching the parade. And like I said, the faces I would see in the clips are just like the little kids. Their mouths are hanging open. You could tell they're just spellbound.
Yeah. Well, you and Dale Palachuk have done a wonderful job co-producing this documentary. You have much to be proud of, and we can all see it premiering Thursday night on Channel 10 at 7 p.m. Saying it slow enough so you can write it down if you need to. 7 o'clock, Channel 10, Thursday night. Leap Day, February 29th, is the premiere of Remembering the Great Circus Parade on Milwaukee PBS. Thank you very much for preserving this very unique Wisconsin history in such a wonderful way.
And thank you for inviting me here tonight to talk about it.